Giants, where he just, rocked the house and gave just an amazing talk. He's a storyteller, artist, founder, and CEO of Roundtable Companies. He's also a publisher at Conscious Capitalism Press. Corey, welcome to the show. I'm happy to talk with you for a lot of reasons, and I think the timing is perfect because I think in the world we're in right now, everyone is rewriting their playbook. Everyone is figuring out how to tell their story and their perspective, and there's so many lenses in right now, and so many stories, so many of the same stories being told from different perspectives right now. So, and so just I'd like your 2 cents as a storyteller, right? As a professional storyteller that teaches people about storytelling. What does storytelling mean today?
Right. First off, thanks for having me, Jon.
Yeah. Welcome.
It's a huge question, right? I mean, what pops up for me as you ask the question is certainly that right now there are so many stories that are colliding. I think at the community level and also at the individual level, like I find even for myself right now, right, there are multiple storylines that are kind of competing for attention, right? So, there's the story of my identity as a founder and CEO. There's a story of my identity as someone who is trapped within the confines of my home, right? And how is that shift? I use the word trapped. That's not quite the right word. Like, right. Probably felt that way at the beginning, and now it's something that it's really shifted, right? Kind of where my heart is with my relationship with home. There's the story of who am I as a white man right now in the world, right? Like, so I certainly think that now more than ever, getting our heads around what are our emerging stories? Because I do think that the stories are changing right now. Watching the way that individuals and businesses are responding differently since the pandemic, and now since what's going on with racism in this country, we are seeing different stories being told in real time. In terms of people's relationship to the world and what's going on, as that's changing, their stories change. So I don't know if that entirely answers your question, but that's kind of what's present for me about how important story is right now, particularly while it's dynamically changing.
Yeah. Let's take it into the boardroom, because your company is about working with people and companies, organizations to tell their story, right? Change the conversation. And your company guides leaders and teams and individuals to not only tell their story, but to kind of help change, their new world. And so leadership right now, I think, is critical more than ever before. True colors of leaders has been shown these last couple of weeks. And so how do companies tell their story today? And how do companies tell their story and share their story with their people today?
I love this question because I think there's something that is strongly resonating with me right now, which is first, it's so important that companies get their hands and hearts around what is the story of who we are right now and who we've been. And it's not necessarily a story that a lot of people are going to be comfortable sharing externally. And yet, right, if you're an organization that wants to grow and change, we have to acknowledge where we are right now. And so I think that there's a couple different things that we've been seeing in the world from a business perspective. You got companies that are having no problem getting people back to work right now. Right. We're talking about people who are safe at home, and people who are, in many cases, being compensated more to stay home than they are to go to work. Mm-hmm. And so if you're an organization that can't compete with safe and paid at home, then you're having trouble getting your workforce back together right now, because the story of the business is I'm better at home.
Right.
than I am working. And organizations, on the other hand, who have a strong sense of purpose and tell a story and live a story that is inclusive of their people and that offers their people a sense of purpose, those folks are having way less of a hard time getting people back into work. And so, I think right now that's just something that we're seeing right now. So you have to recognize, where do you fall on that spectrum as an organization, and where can you learn from that, right? And figure out, okay, here's the story we've been telling. Here's what people's perception is. Is that who we believe we are and who we want to be? And that's ultimately where there's an awesome opportunity. First off, I think to acknowledge in story that this is where we're at, but also to be able to then acknowledge, here's what we want to become, and here are the steps that we're taking to do that. That kind of honest story dialogue with consumers is super powerful, because consumers know when companies are full of crap.
Yeah.
Right. And companies who are ignoring that, who are essentially using storytelling to levy blame in certain places, the consumers are all watching that stuff. So lots of huge opportunity, I think, for shaping of the story, but it's got to begin with an authentic look at how have we been, who are we as an organization, and how is that really in alignment with who we want ourselves to be.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. I want to dive into something, because what you're talking about is so simple it's complicated, and very, very difficult. And one of the things that I loved, and everybody at Small Giants, which is an amazing organization that we're both in, one of the things you've done in a bunch of different breakouts that I've done that you've hosted is walking people through exercises to really understand and increase their awareness and ignite something in them where they really connect the dots and get it. So, and it's been great. I mean, I've seen it firsthand where everybody, you're like doing A, doing B, everyone's like, okay. But then by the time you get, everybody's sharing these amazing epiphanies. So can you walk people through, not an entire exercise, because I know those take a while, but what are some exercises that people can do, questions they can ask themselves to tap into what you're talking about when it comes to purpose and all of these other things?
Sure. Well, yeah, certainly, I think it's important to recognize. I come from the perspective that that when it comes to business, every founder and CEO, we'll start there. Every founder and CEO, I believe, is an artist, and they are using their business as a canvas to paint a version of the world that they wish to see. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's very subconscious stuff. Right. So, my trajectory in life was very much around the polarity of special and invisible. Came from a Jewish household, and I know you've heard this story, Jon, but you grew up where when I was 5, my mom went from this bright shining light to her light totally going out through depression. Right. And so I knew what it was to be the recipient of an amazing amount of warmth and light, and I knew what it was to be in the dark, essentially, right? And so those two pieces became this through line of my life, and eventually, without realizing what I was doing, I created a company that helps people who are amidst that challenge of feeling like they're meant to do something, but also feeling like there's not enough light on them to achieve, right, or that they're invisible.
But can you do me one favor real quickly? Because I know what you mean by a through line, but can you define what a through line is? Because it's a pretty powerful thing once you realize what it is.
Sure.
And I think, so I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. Well, you used a great terminology earlier when you said connecting the dots, right? So I think when we can center in on ultimately what is the polarity that defines our lifetimes, mm-hmm. And in my case, that's the language that I use: special and invisible. I call them two sides of the same coin, right? And so from a through line standpoint, the two of those collide really intensely, kind of like once a decade in my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't piece this together until I was 38, 39 years old, 46 now. So I'm, more of my life, I've not understood how this has occurred for me than how much I have. But in the work that we do, we find this over and over again that there are these repeated collisions that happen, and they happen with so much intensity that they're disorienting. So the opportunity for anyone who's interested in really understanding how their life has essentially brought them to the place where they're championing whatever they're championing now, they can go back and look decade by decade. What are the primary moments where I've been shaken to my core with such intensity because I believed the world was one way, but the universe stepped forward and smacked me with a 2x4 and said, nope, you're so wrong. And I had to then adjust and make new meaning. And sometimes I've lived from the shadow side of the coin for a while to try that on. Like, what is it to be invisible? What is it to just, lurk in the shadows? And ultimately I came to this, recognition after doing that for like a year of, wow, that is so not where I want to come from. And it's incredibly important in my life and in my business that I don't simply try to avoid that thing that makes me uncomfortable, but that I actually learn to appreciate and shine light onto it. Because that tension between, for me, special and invisible, everyone's got their polarity. That tension is at play every minute of every day. It is so intrinsic. So when you talk about, the idea of a through line, it really, if we are not aware and able to recognize when we're coming from each of those places, then we are controlled by them. For the longest time, my need to be special, quote unquote, was so dominant that I would do whatever it took in order to feel like I was living on that side of the coin. And if ever I felt invisible, like it was a fight to get back to special. That means I might manipulate people to get what I want, right? I could be controlling and like all these things that I have justified as well-intended, but I'm actually showing up particularly within my family, within my business, in ways that are sabotaging the thing that I really want. So the creating that awareness creates more choice, particularly within a business. I mean, it's hugely powerful.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Awareness. The first time I heard the word through line was when I was I listened to a talk on how to give a proper TED talk, and they talked about through line, meaning like the common theme that you that carries. But it's a powerful thing, and we all have kind of these gifts that present themselves that we sometimes ignore, and that sometimes is our own through line of what makes us really unique.
Particularly in business, when it comes to storytelling, the more that we can trace back how we got here and take a real sincere, authentic look at kind of the major experiences in life, both the highs and the lows, the more that we can do that, the more that we can tell that story to the world in a way, especially from a brand perspective, in a way that helps readers / consumers, right, have the experience of hearing the story and then clicking in on that moment of, oh, wow, you guys were made for this. And who doesn't want to work with a company that's made to do what they're doing, as opposed to just a transactional, like sounded like a good idea, or I could make some money, or I fell into it. A lot of people, you ask, how did you get into your line of work? And a lot of people have a belief that it was just a coincidence. There's nothing deeper there. There's always deeper stuff, and unpacking that lets you then shape the story authentically, but in a way that creates immense trust. And then, of course, you got to live that through, and you got to uphold that in every step of the business. But it's a beacon that that way, like minds, like tribes, can step forward and say, man, I've been looking to do business with a company like yours. Didn't know it existed. Thank goodness we found one another.
Corey, what are the 3 key things for every story?
Well, number one is tension. There is no story without tension. So that's why I even frame it, from the internal tension of the two sides of the coin, right? There's a tension going on inside of me. And then I start building a business and I attract a whole bunch of people around that business, people who work for that business. And then there's a certain amount of alignment based on my own tension that people are drawn to, right? My search for how to exist amidst special and invisible attracts a certain kind of person. And then our story starts expanding out from me to other key people who are influential within the business. And then there's all kinds of tension that exists within that whole ecosystem. Being able to pinpoint and acknowledge that tension is imperative to a story keeping people on the page, right? Or keeping people entranced. So obviously we want people to read to the end or to get to the end of the story, however that's taking shape. And tension is the gravity that holds people in. It's got to be authentic tension, of course, but that is the number one key. Secondly, I think vulnerability is huge, absolutely massive. And in the sense that if I share an intellectual version of my story, and I keep I'm coming from my head and other people are experiencing it from their head in an intellectual capacity, and we never get below, we never get into the heart, we never get into more emotion, then I'm actually holding people at a distance as I'm telling my story, literally keeping them apart. So the willingness to access the things that are uncomfortable to share in our storytelling, those are the things that pull people in. Our intuitive human belief, I think, is that it'll be a 50-50 split. 50% will lean in and 50% will pull back. The reality that I see in my work is way closer to 90-10 or maybe 95-5. Yes, when we're authentic and vulnerable, there are a percentage of people who, for whatever reason, get triggered in a way where they back off. But most people lean in because it's so rare in this world to hear things that are more true and honest. So tension and vulnerability. And I suppose the third piece that's popping up for me is as I'm reflecting on the question, is vigilance. Like, storytelling is not easy. It's not straightforward for most of us. It's not something we sit down once and tackle. It is a constant evolution and revision. It took us 12 years to finally nail down the language of our purpose as an organization. 12 years. Now we finally landed on our purpose is to help you tell the story behind yours. And I really still feel drawn to that. I love that. And it will probably still evolve for, the rest of our organization's lifetime. But for 12 years, we couldn't fight. It was revision. And then suddenly it clicks. So it's a willingness, I think, to be invested in the telling, a willingness to be invested in the telling of that story, to continue to help clarify and help bring out the power of it so that people can really feel what's authentic.
Let's talk about book writing for a minute. I know that's one of the things you guys do, right, is help people tell their story through books. Most people, I wrote a book a few years ago. I'm in the process of writing another one right now. Everybody wants to write a book. And so just walk people through a little bit, the process of writing a book, right? Because I think most people don't understand and always want to know what the process of writing a book is. Sure.
So we help people to write a fairly specific kind of book. So we're not as big on the information product, essentially the here's what I've learned book.
Right.
We're big on the who I am book. So we sometimes call it the book that you're born to write. So that's where our interest comes from. And when someone is interested in engaging in that and is in a place, oftentimes, like it might be a CEO of a company who's recognized that their purpose might want to extend beyond the walls of their business, for example. That's a lot of what we do, like the recognition of, I think we've learned a lot here, and we can't keep it secret. Like we have to share it with other people and be of service. Right. So in that transition, we're a great partner for that kind of product, because we don't know exactly what it's going to be at the end when we start.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a huge key of book writing. I've said this for years, and it still rings true for me. I cannot expect my reader to change through reading my book if I have not changed through writing it. Yeah. So if I thought I knew what I wanted at the beginning and delivered exactly that, right, then I'm not changing. Right. The other key piece of it is that when we share a book about what we know up until now, we actually put that out into the world, and what we attract keeps us exactly where we are, because we attract people who want everything that we've learned up until now. When we write a Who I Am book that shares the journey and connects those dots we were talking about earlier of how I got to this place where this is the thing I'm championing, we invite people to be a part of our transformation as we continue to evolve into what's next. So when we're approaching the book from that standpoint, the first key piece, typically the first 2 to 3 months, we call a blueprint process, right? Because we don't exactly know what it is that we're building yet. We have to take a look at what's the clay essentially that we're going to take and shape and mold into something. And then we can determine, does this want to be a high rise? Does this want to be a condo? Is this a castle? What are we creating here? And we don't pretend to know that at the beginning. So there's a lot of unpacking initially through an extensive interview process and a provocative and yet a fun and exciting interview process, where you got people who are super fascinated with what your journey has been to date, and to help really get into some of the nuance to figure out what are the major puzzle pieces that come together to form what you believe now. So that's the first 2-3 months, is kind of figuring out what are those puzzle pieces and then determining how might they want to be assembled. Yeah. And then we move into capturing the voice of the book and making sure that, because oftentimes we're writing on behalf of a client. Clients come to us in a wide range, from wanting to write every word themselves to not wanting to write a single word. So our team is often helping to create the voice of the book, which is not just the way I sound around the dinner table, right? Because there's all, we're talking about a book, so it's all words, right? But I'm not just the words that I use. I'm the intonation. I am the rhythm and pacing of how I talk. I am the emotional highs and lows, and where I get really excited and jazzed up, and then where do I get really somber and quiet? So we're figuring out how do we package all that, so when someone reads it who knows that author, they have the experience of, oh, that is so you, as opposed to, yeah, that sounded like the words you used, right? So we're working on the voice. And then once we have the voice and the blueprint, then it's just like hit the gas, man. And then we go cruising through chapters, and then it's just execution. And then we get to a point where it's like layering, right? So and this is such a fun piece for folks like us. It's the augmentation of trust with the author, because what they're willing to tell us on day one is very different than in month 3. Around the 6th month, it's not unusual for people to say things to us they've never said to their spouse. Yeah. And around the 9th month, when they're going back to layering the manuscript, that's when people start saying things out loud they've never said to themselves before. And that's like, we have to be really highly attentive during each of those stages to grab the nuggets that are surfacing and make sure they become part of the book.
I love it. The writing a book for me was a great journey. I mapped it all out. Then I started, and it just took a life of its own. Yeah, it kind of unraveled as each chapter kind of happened, and it's a great experience. Corey, I always love talking with you. You're always full of wisdom and depth. How can people get a hold of you?
Oh, thank you so much, Jon. They can find me roundtablecompanies.com. It's companies with an IES.com. They can find me on Twitter, Corey Blake 9000, on Instagram, Corey Blake 9000. Find me on LinkedIn under Corey Michael Blake. Happy to connect with folks.
I love it. Well, I appreciate you as always. You're always full of great knowledge, and thanks, man. I appreciate you taking time to talk on this Think Business Live. And any additional contact information you want to give anybody?
Oh man, just keep. I would say just keep during this crazy, constant time of change. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah. One last question I have for you.
Sure.
We got a minute left. One last question. Kids graduating college today. It's a different world. What's one quick piece of advice you'd give them?
Know your story. The more that you know really where you've been, the more you can help someone understand how you can contribute in ways way beyond a resume or, a simple traditional interview. Like, know your story.
That's well said. That's a mic drop right there. Corey Blake.
Right on, brother.
Thank you very much.
Good to be with you.